and then good morning once again, everyone. Welcome to the Cultural Integration Fellowship, and thank you for joining this morning. We were founded in 1951 by Dr. Haridas and Beena Chaudhary as a center of universal religion and spiritual practice. And in keeping with unity, or rather the spirit of unity and diversity, we honor the spiritual traditions of diverse cultures and religions. As many of you would know, we have been celebrating Mother's birthday in the month of February. We begin the month with a talk from our dear Santosh Krinsky, who has titled the talk as The Mother, the Divine Shakti, and Her Personal Incarnation. Santosh has been studying Sri Aurobindo's writings since 1971 and has a daily blog at SriAurobindo and podcast at anchor.fm/Santosh-Krinsky. The details are there in the announcement that I have sent out to you. Santosh resided at Sri Aurobindo Ashram from spring 1973 through winter 1974. He is the author of 17 books and is editor-in-chief at Lotus Press. He is the president of Institute for Holistic Education, a non-profit focused on integrating spirituality into daily life. He has spent more than 48 years building and developing infrastructure for publishing, distributing, and educating about the spiritual path of Sri Aurobindo, as well as developing and guiding companies at the forefront of publishing books and distributing books and podcasts to support the natural market as well as the metaphysical market in North America. For more information on the writings of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, you can visit lotuspress.com, as well as visit the daily blog posting at SriAurobindo.wordpress.com and the webpage aurobindo.net. I welcome Santosh to the podium of the Cultural Integration Fellowship. Before I hand over the screen to him, I want to read a few lines from this longish poem by Dr. Haridas Chaudhary from this book titled The Rhythm of Truth. The title of this poem is The Flame of Love, Radha's Longing. The devoted wife Radha was minding her household duties when suddenly the strange music, the compelling melody of Krishna's flute, reached her ears, ravished her heart, made her captive, sound intoxicated. She forgot her work in hand, forgot her family surroundings, suddenly cut adrift from secure moorings. She set out in search of Krishna. As I said earlier, I'm not going to read the entire poem, but what I'll do is that I will read out this brief explanation of the poem that Dr. Chaudhary himself has. He writes, "This is what happens to the human soul when one day, at a psychological moment, comes the call of the divine, penetrates the inmost being, unsettles life's settled order, leads with irresistible inner compulsion, toward the unknown and unseen. Let's meditate on these words for a couple of minutes. I welcome Santosh Krinsky to the fellowship once again. Over to you, Santosh.
Thank you. Greetings, everybody. Namaste. I was asked to speak about the mother here today, and I don't know of any more appropriate topic. The Divine Shakti is the power of the universe. And so before we begin the actual discussion, I wanted to make a brief tour of the universe. Virtually everybody here has had an opportunity at some point in life to look out, gaze out at the stars, and just see the thousands or millions of lights out there at unimaginable distances. And if we reflect on that, we're now advised by people who have been studying these things intensely that there are millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions of stars out there, all with their own solar systems, their own planets, their own movement, their own energies, as part of the Milky Way galaxy. And we're further told that beyond the Milky Way galaxy, there are untold millions of galaxies in the universe. And we all believe that we here on this small planet, we as atoms in the endless universe are the center of all creation. And that we can understand and explain what it is the Divine Shakti is creating here in this miraculous universe. Now, if we drill down from that universal scope into our little solar system in our little galaxy and come down to our little planet, there are untold beings, thousands, maybe millions of beings that live on this planet, maybe inside volcanic tubes or down in the depths of the oceans that we will never interface with or understand. Why has all this been created? None of us, I believe, can say that. This is something that the Divine Shakti, in her power of creation to carry out the divine will, is doing for purposes far beyond what we as human beings can even imagine. Sri Aurobindo has described the mother in his small book titled The Mother, and the passage that most impressed me is the start of chapter 2, where he states, "In all that is done in the universe, the divine through his Shakti is behind all action, but he is veiled by his yoga maya and works through the ego of the jiva in the lower nature. Sri Aurobindo relates this divine Shakti as the universal creatrix. And we, with our egos, are part of that creation. We are creating and think that we own it, that we are it. But in reality, it's that divine Shakti acting through each and every one of us, just as it acts through each and every being and force in the entire universe to create something far beyond our mental capacities. There's no duality. Human beings are part of the manifestation, and thus we too are the divine working through his Shakti. We don't recognize this because we're fixated on the ego personality, the face of the divine that we confuse as being separate. And this brings us to how we can appreciate and understand the mother as a human individual. Those who identify most closely with the divine Shakti, they pierce through the veil of the ego personality, and they can then be seen as direct powers and emanations of this Shakti, the mother. So in the entire creation, there are a range of beings who come forth to propel the manifestation forward. And those who are most conscious, who are least attached to the ego personality, to that ego of the jiva, experience, identify with, and act from the force of the Shakti directly. Now, Sri Aurobindo goes on in chapter 6 to describe the 4 powers of the mother. And this is really how we can understand the manifestation of the mother as a human embodiment at the same time as relating to those larger divine powers that create that universe within which we reside. Sri Aurobindo states, the 4 powers of the mother are 4 of her outstanding personalities, portions and embodiments of her divinity, through whom she acts on her creatures, orders and harmonizes her creations in the worlds, and directs the working out of her 1,000 forces. Now, the implication, the divine Shakti works both impersonally and personally in the vast forces of the universe and in the smallest details of every atom and every being formed in the creation and acting in the world. Sri Aurobindo goes on to state, for the mother is one, but she comes before us with differing aspects. Many are her powers and personalities, many her emanations and vibhutis that do her work in the universe. So the divine Shakti takes innumerable forms. It incarnates to act in and upon the world with not only the diffused power implied as she works through the separate beings and forces she has created, but more directly through incarnations that embody more of this power in a conscious and powerful manner. Sri Aurobindo then goes on to state, the one whom we adore as the mother is the divine conscious force that dominates all existence. One and yet so many-sided that to follow her movement is impossible, even for the quickest mind and for the freest and most vast intelligence. The mother is the consciousness and force of the Supreme, and far above all she creates. The implication here is that the human mind, as brilliant as anyone may be, can't judge, interpret, or fully comprehend the action of the Divine Shakti in the creation of the universe. However much we try, we always reach a limit beyond which we cannot appreciate nor understand the action. And that's absolutely a truth that we experienced in the life and teachings of the mother at the Sri Aurobindo Ashram. Many, many people over the years tried to judge her based on a human standard, and her actions and her motives and her ways exceeded what they could follow. And only looking back through the lens of time and history can we begin to see the power that was at work and that is still at work as part of the transition that humanity is undergoing as we move away from the limitations of the vital and mental framework that has brought us to the place we are today in the creation of the human society, but which has become a limitation and an obstacle to where we need to go. Sri Aurobindo goes on to state further in chapter 6, but something of her ways can be seen and felt through her embodiments, and the more seizable because more defined and limited temperament and action of the goddess forms in whom she consents to be manifest to her creatures. And so people have somewhat of a confusing relationship to the divine and the divine Shakti. Some treat the divine as something totally separate from us, which can only be worshipped from afar. And then some treat the divine as embodied in a particular human being and only can be worshipped from near. And the difference between the impersonal and the personal is one that has created endless amounts of confusion for humanity in all of its religions and philosophies and ideas about life. So the idea that the divine is both impersonal and personal, and that the personal is not limited by the human limitations that we all experience, simply because that manifestation has attenuated the veil and therefore directly communicates, understands, and carries out the will of the divine much more clearly and directly than the rest of us do at this point in our evolution, is something that needs to be appreciated, even if not fully understood. So Sri Aurobindo continues, there are 3 ways of being of the mother, of which you can become aware when you enter into touch of oneness with the conscious force that upholds us and the universe. Transcendent, the original Supreme Shakti. She stands above the worlds and links the creation to the ever unmanifest mystery of the Supreme. Universal, the cosmic Mahashakti. She creates all these beings and contains and enters, supports and conducts all these million processes and forces. Individual, she embodies the power of these 2 vaster ways of her existence, makes them living and near to us, and mediates between the human personality and the divine nature. She sends her own emanations of them into these lower worlds to intervene, to govern, to battle and conquer, to lead and turn their cycles, to direct the total and the individual lines of their forces. These emanations are the many divine forms and personalities in which men have worshipped her under different names throughout the ages. But also she prepares and shapes through these powers and their emanations the minds and bodies of her vibhutis, even as she prepares and shapes minds and bodies for the vibhutis of the Ishvara, that she may manifest in the physical world and in the disguise of the human consciousness some ray of her power and quality and presence. So if we reflect on this, we can see that the divine not only governs like a god up in heaven somewhere in a cloud who creates the world and then lets everything fly, but also, besides having the original creation and the force that gets set loose, is able to embody and carry out that impulsion through the ages, through the entire universe, and at the same time creates individual beings and humans who can carry forward that process at the detail level. If you look at human beings in the vast universe at the atomic level, if you will, we're nothing more than atoms in that universe. And yet that guidance and that force of direction is active within us, as well as everywhere else in the universe. Sri Aurobindo continues, the mother not only governs from all from above, but she descends into this lesser triple universe. Impersonally, all things here, even the movements of the ignorance, are herself in veiled power and her creations in diminished substance, her nature body and nature force. And they exist because moved by the mysterious fiat of the Supreme to work out something that was there in the possibilities of the infinite, she has consented to the great sacrifice and has put on like a mask the soul and forms of the ignorance. But personally too, she has stooped to descend here into the darkness, that she may lead it to the light, into the falsehood and error that she may convert it to the truth, into this death that she may turn it to godlike life, into this world pain and its obstinate sorrow and suffering, that she may end it in the transforming ecstasy of her sublime Ananda. So Sri Aurobindo has described for us the action of the Divine Shakti in its universal form, laying down the lines of the whole creation. In its universal form of actually manifesting the vision and purpose of that divine intention, and in a personal form, in that it can actually interact with those beings that the Divine Shakti has created to help us, to guide us, to encourage us, and to support us as we grow and widen our understanding and ourselves begin to attenuate the veil of the ego that masks the divinity from us in our daily lives, just as the daytime and the sunshine masks the wideness and vastness of the universe that we can only see when the sun withdraws for a while. And in the night, we can look out and see the countless stars and recognize that something far beyond our human intellect is at work here. So, with this background, the question of the action of the mother becomes very relevant. And people wonder, well, how do we know? How do we see? How do we understand? And I say, well, each one of us has certain experiences in our lives that are inexplicable, other than that we have received a guidance, we have been granted a darshan, and we have been motivated and put forward on a path that we may not have considered previously through some event, circumstance, experience, whatever it may be. The Bible talks about the experience of Saul on the road to Damascus, where he was struck down with a divine vision and his entire life changed. And I'm sure that many of us have had, if not as dramatic an experience, have had turning points in our lives where we've begun to recognize that working and reading and interacting and eating and sleeping is just not enough, that there is a greater purpose for our lives. In my own experience, I was in college and blissfully ignorant of all these things. And after undergoing a near-death experience, I woke up and the sun was shining through the window, and I knew there was a divine providence in the world, and that my life was not to be a standard career in Western society. And a few weeks after that, I dropped out of college and started studying yoga, which I had never had any interest or knowledge about. And it was in Europe at that time that the Life Divine was handed to me as a gift by a German philosopher with whom I was having regular meetings. And when I opened the book, randomly to the chapter, The Aim of Life, 4 Theories of Existence, I immediately knew that this spoke to my soul, and that that's why I had undergone the suffering of the near-death experience and the difficulty of separating myself from a totally Western career and path forward, and undertook the uncertain, unknown path of studying and taking up a yogic pursuit. At some point after that, I was back in the United States, and I was visiting the East-West Center in Los Angeles. And when I visited there, one time Udar Pinto from the ashram came to visit. And he gave a talk. And afterwards, a number of us went out to dinner with him. And at the conclusion of the dinner, Udar told me, "You should come to Pondicherry, to the ashram." And I laughed. I said, "Well, that's a wonderful thing. I'd love to do it. I have no money. I've got no even thought of how I could make that happen or be real." And he said, mother will provide. That evening, I went back to my parents' house where I was staying at the time, and I was confronted by my upset and angry parents who had never reconciled the idea that I had dropped out of college and gone off on this crazy search of yoga. And they confronted me and said, "You really need a psychiatrist. And we'd like you to agree to have psychological counseling." And I said, "Well, I'm not really interested in doing that. I don't think I need that. I'm just fine where I am. Thank you." And they said, "Well, that's fine. If that isn't going to work, the only other thing we can think of to cure you of this insanity is we're going to give you a 1-year round trip ticket to Pondicherry and some funds so you can live there for a year and you can get it out of your system." Pure coincidence or the mother's operation behind the scenes? You decide. For me, it was very clear that evening Udar said, "Come, the mother will provide." And several hours later, the ticket was provided. So we try to judge these things from our human standards, and I'm sure that everybody will think of all kinds of different excuses why this may or may not have been the mother's intervention, because after all, who has that power as a human being? Who can manifest that? Who can play the strings of the divine orchestra at that level, down to the atomic individual level, and make things happen? But I know in my heart, with my gratitude, that the mother intervened in my life at that moment. So I went to live at the ashram, and it was the spring of 1973, and you all probably know that 1973 was a seminal year in the mother's manifestation in a physical body. When I got there in May, she was already retired from coming out, and her health was considered declining. Of course, some people were saying, well, she's doing inner work on her cells, and some people will say, well, her health is failing. And again, who are we to judge that? Which human being can judge? And so we got to August, and people were saying, she's not coming out for the darshan. It's not going to happen. She's just too weak and too frail, and it isn't going to happen. It'll be canceled, or it is canceled. And I went to bed on the night of the 14th of August, knowing from everything I'd heard from everybody that the darshan had been canceled. And around 3 a.m, I woke up to an electric shock. And I felt like my body was 6 inches above the ground. I just had this force working through me. And I knew that the darshan was on, and that the mother would be coming out to bless everybody. Now, we can have all kinds of explanations for this, but I know in my heart, with my gratitude, that the mother was acting in Pondicherry on the devotees to wake them up to the upcoming darshan, which to her was an important activity, an important darshan. And I wasn't the only one. When I went to the ashram that morning, the sign was out, there will be a darshan this evening. I think it was 6:15, something like that. And people started gathering in the street, as I also gathered in the street, and it was raining cats and dogs. I mean, it was really raining, and people were getting soaked, and they were standing there in devotion. And then shortly before the darshan was to start, the rain stopped, the clouds parted, the sun came out, and the mother came out and appeared on the balcony and graced everybody with her darshan. And afterwards, she went back in and the rain started up again. And I think everybody went away feeling like something miraculous had happened. Later, she described to somebody that the rain was a supramental rain, that it was pouring down force on her devotees, and that those who were there were being blessed by that rain. Now, many had complained about the rain. Umbrellas were out. I had an umbrella, but I gave it away to somebody who was complaining about the rain. But it was very clear later that there was intentionality there. There was a force active there that we could not appreciate or understand. So we then come to November 17th, the day of Mother's Mahasamadhi. And I had been given the message that morning from the mother. It was actually a birthday message. I didn't know the process. And I went in for my birthday on the 16th of November to MP Pundit. And he said, no, you have to come in the day before to get the blessings on the birthday. And he said, well, no problem. We'll take it in. You'll get it tomorrow, 17th. So I got the birthday blessings the morning of the 17th. And the message was live within, be not shaken by outward happenings. And I was in a very abstracted state that entire day. It was almost like a walking trance. Everywhere I went, it was just like, live within, be not shaken by outward happenings. And it went so deep into my being that I was almost like non-reactive. I was almost like in a zombie-like mood, not really responding to anybody or anything. It was that intense. And I went back to where I was staying that night. And in my sleep, I had a dream. And the dream that there was this tremendous darkness choking everything on the planet. And then there was a brilliant light, and the darkness was dispelled. And I woke up from that dream basically sweating. And I used to work in the fruit room. So I had to get up early morning, like 4 in the morning, and head over to the fruit room on my cycle to the ashram to distribute fruits for the sadhaks. And when I rode into the ashram area there, what did I see but a brilliant light everywhere? The whole ashram was lit up and there were people everywhere. And I asked innocently, what's going on? And I was told the mother left her body. Now, people were crying, but I was in this status of live within, be not shaken by outward happenings on the one side, and this marvelous dream of the darkness choking everything and then the light dispelling it all that I had just had, that I was still shaking from. And I thought, this is an outward happening. The mother is active. I'm not going to cry. And for the next few days, people streamed in from all over the world. They streamed in grief. They streamed in tears. They were heartbroken. People who were devotees of long-standing nature. And I was sitting, for those of you who have been to the ashram, probably all of you, by the samadhi, there's some stairs that go up and there's a little balcony just over the samadhi. And I went up there and I just stayed there for several days for the most part and watched the people coming in and was still in this very abstracted, almost trance-like state. And not really, I have to say, I wasn't even emotionally affected because something was preventing that from happening. And I watched as people came in with their tears and their grief. And it was interesting. You have the samadhi, and then around the samadhi, the elder sadhaks were all sitting in deep meditation, unmoving, silent, powerful. And then the mother's body was laid in state back in the meditation hall around the back behind MP Pandit's office, over by Nalini Das' office at the time. And the children from the International Center of Education, the children of the ashram formed a line holding hands, guiding people in through the entrance along the wall back to the meditation hall so people could have that last darshan. And the children were radiant. And as people walked down there and went to the back and then came back out, you could see they were relieved of their grief. They were relieved of their tears. They were relieved of that heartbroken feeling. And they felt at peace. And I thought, I've got to feel what those kids are feeling because, and I was a kid too. I mean, I was in my early 20s, so it wasn't inappropriate, but I went down there and joined hands with some of the children for a while, and there was an electric force running through them. And it was taking away the grief of the people coming in, and people had peace. So, who knows? Human beings will find endless intellectual reasons why all of this can be explained. I know I'm as intellectual as the next person, and I can tell you I have not found any explanation other than that it's beyond the comprehension of the human mind. And therefore, I can only sit with gratitude and love and try to, in some way, be worthy of the blessings that have been bestowed upon me, and try to be of some aid and comfort wherever I can in the world. And that's really, what I have to say about that. Now, I want to add a couple things about the action of the mother, because it's extraordinary, not just these personal actions, not just the force, but the fact that this individual could take charge of an ashram that eventually grew to thousands of people, set up departments that operated to care for the needs of those people, set up an international center of education, and educated children with new ideas about education that has helped many, many of these children to flourish in their lives and in their work. And then founded the city of Auroville as an experiment and laboratory for the development of new technologies to solve humanity's crisis problems, the evolutionary crisis, as well as be a cauldron of human unity, where all of the different cultures, religions, languages, viewpoints, social mores all came together and were thrown together and said, figure it out, folks, you've got to learn how to live together. And they're struggling with that, but they're trying, and that's wonderful. And so who do we know, who can we think of who can do that kind of work and inspire tens of thousands of people around the world to do work in their own way, in their own fields, in their own place, such as the work of Dr. Anbina Chaudhary, whom I have a great love and respect for, having worked closely with them at various points in time, and many, many others. Robert McDermott and Devashish, of course, and Kundan and Tara in Delhi. I mean, there's so many individuals that I have such a deep respect for the work they do. And it's all inspired by Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. And so I don't know if there's any questions, but thank you for joining me in this exploration of the Divine Shakti and her transcendent, universal, and individual manifestations.
Thank you so very much, Santosh. You know, I must say, ever since I came here in the year 2000, I've heard many talks. And if this was not the best, it most certainly is one of the best. And I'm not saying this lightly. You know, I choose my words very carefully. To hear your experiences with the Mother, I have no words to describe. And therefore, I would say that if we could take a couple of minutes, you know, to let this experience actually sink in before we depart and have a conversation. This experience that you have shared with us, it must go into our beings in a state of silence. I know that I'm veering away from the normal practice that we have been having over the years, but let's do that. And then we'll come back and we'll have a conversation. A couple of minutes, please. Ma. I open the floor for discussions. Earl has his hand raised, so I was just wondering if he could unmute himself and pose his question.
Thank you, Kundan. I am here in Lodi. Linda and I live in San Francisco, and we have a place here in Lodi in close proximity to Sri Aurobindo Sadhana Pitam. Santos, thank you for reminding us so deeply of the many ways of the divine. And I have felt a connection to you personally that I have always been curious about, and I'm delighted to share with all here. I was directed to you long ago when I was missing a volume of Madhav Pandit's commentaries on the Mother. And I've just felt this connection, and something you said has enlivened that. You mentioned this point where your parents gave you this choice between psychiatrist and Pondicherry. I have not been to Pondicherry. I have not been to India, but I was given and taken and took the choice of the psychiatrist in this yoga. And that psychiatrist was Richard Stein, who many of you may know, who was deeply steeped in this yoga. And he had an adesh to go to Pondicherry. And he arrived there on the very day of the Mother's Mahasamadhi. So he was there, and I studied and worked with Richard for many years. And so through him, I was there on that day as well, without ever having been to Pondicherry. And I carry the force of the Matra Mandir, and I feel all this and feel that in this yoga, at its present stage, we have SASP here in Lodi. We have other centers of force in this yoga, and we can all deeply participate in it from wherever we are. It is a universal force. So the path of the psychiatrist really was an option if you found the right psychiatrist. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your. I think, the people who consider themselves as children of the Mother, she certainly is our psychiatrist. At least I can say for myself, my mental health would be badly affected, if she's not around. More questions, comments, sharings? I think Mira has her hand up. Please unmute yourself and go ahead, Mira.
Hi, thank you, Santosh. That was just wonderful. Yeah, the real experiences, that's what gives us inspiration. And I was wondering if you would mind sharing your near-death experience, if that is not too personal.
It's not too personal. I was involved while I was in college in the movement against the war in Vietnam. And I went to Washington, D.C. On something they called the May Day. And people from all over the country went there. And thousands of people were there. And I was a little too visible there, I guess, but I was basically attacked while I was down there with a plainclothes car came by and threw some liquid onto me into my eye. And I fell down on the street. Some other people carried me to a first aid tent, probably saved my vision. That night I came down with the worst flu, cold, whatever that I'd ever experienced in my life. I couldn't move, which meant I didn't get arrested the next day and get shuttled into the big stadium with the tens of thousands of others and didn't get part of the financial settlement. But I went back to Michigan, and a few weeks later, I was basically poisoned again. And that one stopped my breathing. And I didn't know what to do, but I heard a voice inside that says, do yogic breathing. And I had no idea what that was, but something started breathing me. I was in excruciating pain. All my muscles in my whole body were spasm tight. And it was only that process that got me through it. And when it was over, and actually someone saw me and said, you need a hospital. And I was so paranoid at the time. I said, I'm going into my room. If I don't come out in 3 days, do what you want with the body, but I'm not going to a hospital. I didn't trust anything at that point. And after it was over and I woke up and I was looking out the window is when I saw the sun shining and I knew there was a divine providence and my life changed, as I mentioned. And a few weeks later, a friend of mine called me and said he was leaving for Europe. And I said, well, give me a few more weeks. Let me finish off the final exams of the term so that I conclude my record cleanly, and then I'll come with you. And I knew that he was not going to stay there. He was simply a vehicle to move me out of my existing life into a new life, and then he would return, which is what happened.
Thank you.
She certainly has her ways in bringing us onto the path.
Kicking and screaming.
Yeah, we don't take the path very easily, you know. Yeah, and sometimes she takes the form of Kali, as she did with me. But that's another story for another time. You know? More comments?
Vishesh.
Hi, Devishita. Where are you? Oh, hi. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Santosh. That was really very moving. And I've known you for so many years. I actually didn't know the story at all, particularly the whole year in Pondicherry that you spent. And your description of that last day was so graphic. It really brought us there. It made us experience in detail what happened during the darshan and also on the day of the Mahasamadhi. So I was, basking in that entire experience with you, but I wanted to ask you that part which we are also always, those who have never met the mother in person, curious about. You detailed every aspect of that Mahasamadhi. I mean, not the Mahasamadhi, the darshan day. But can you tell us something about the darshan itself? Or what was that like when she came out and she looked on the people and the people looked on her? What was your experience of that, Santosh?
Everybody was, I think, in a state of utmost devotion. And so the whole atmosphere that we all experienced as a community, as a collectivity, was one of just absolute heart-opening devotion. I don't know that anybody, maybe others experienced other things, but that was really, for me, the overwhelming force of that day. The mother later described the supramental rain and all those things, but I don't know that anybody that I've heard of or know of actually experienced it that way. They just experienced this outpouring of love and devotion and surrender of the ego that you feel in the presence of a being who is so manifestly able to awaken those forces within each individual. And of course, these were her children, her devotees, the people she'd lived with and guided for so many years. The love and force that was there, it was overwhelming. And I have to say, you've never heard the story because I don't tell the story. That's something that very, very few people have ever heard. But when I was asked to speak about the mother, I have to speak about my experience with the mother. And so I decided it was an appropriate time and place to do this.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And that was the mother's last darshan, was it not, Santosh?
Yes.
So it was very special, very, very special. Thank you.
We are definitely grateful to you for sharing this experience. You know, I think it has definitely enriched us at the fellowship.
So much, Santosh. I really enjoyed hearing your experiences. It was amazing, so beautiful. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
More comments, more sharings.
Well, I just want to acknowledge what's already been said. My appreciation for the presentation. And I know sometimes that stories that are very deeply important and personal to us, we need not to share very often because it loses some of its mojo. And so I appreciate that you read this moment, whatever the elements were that came into it here at the ashram, and just really appreciating that it's not just another retelling. It's a very special moment, and I'm grateful that I got to participate with you and meet you today. So thank you.
I agree.
On that note, I think we should close today. And thank you very much, Santosh. You know, as I
It
said,
was really wonderful.
words won't be able to express the gratitude that I feel for this event today. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you, Santosh.